Um, so why is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talking? How is this relevant in the 21st century, particularly living in the West? Well, just think about abortion. I mean, you're you're killing your child, and even the fact, I mean, Mufti Radhan, you would say that. I asked him one time about birth control, and he said, yeah, it's wadi khafi, right? It's also like it's like you're burning. Technically, it sort of is, right? Because you have fertilized zygote, and many of these birth control methods don't allow for implantation of the zygote in the uterine wall, and that's actually not the preferable way if you had to do birth control to do it. But the idea that there was a fertilized zygote that had the potential now to go to the blastocyst phase and develop and become a fetus and go on to become a human being, and you just sort of, don't allow it to establish home, and it's, in a sense, aborted. He said it's like a hidden way of burying your child. I'm not saying that it's impermissible, but and in more realistic sense, there are people who actually get abortions and they go to abortion clinics. You see those when you're driving on these highways of maybe more traditional sectors of the United States. They'll have, I'm alive, and they're very strong on this issue. Sometimes, actually, some voters, they could hate the Republican who's running, but they're one issue voters. They're just for the sake of abortion, because this is in their deen or in their values. Like, you can't kill a life. They're like, I'm just going to vote for this person because this will stop this. And a lot of this came out of Roe v. Wade, and because of Roe v. Wade, people sort of thought, oh, this is the truth, because it was already decided in court. The courts are not a determinant of truth. They're extremely politically charged. And you actually look at the arguments that are advanced, they're actually sort of weak arguments. And you have to understand one of the reasons why abortion is allowed to such a huge extent, because it allows people to live a lifestyle and engage in haram unencumbered. Right? There's a natural thing, deterrent for women to sleep around and live a loose lifestyle. Because if you do, you might end up having a child that you're going to have to take care of, and there'll be no male figure around to sort of support you in doing that. And it's not easy. I mean, by any measure, I don't care if you lived in the times of men walking around with saber-toothed tigers, or you live now, in Manhattan. Being a single mother is not an easy task. But now they want to play loose and fast, and you live this fast lifestyle and club and one-night stands and all of these things, and not have to pay the price for it. And one of the ways that was possible is, so now you create abortions. And then the other reason that people have abortions is because, and a lot of time, birth control and all of these things, the reason they do that, dominant reason, is because they're like, kids are expensive. There's literally people, and it was shocking to me the first time, because we see our children as rahmah, we see them as an amana, we see them as a zina. There's people who can't even have children, but there's people who sat down and done the math that if you have a child, it's going to cost this much money. And they calculate so, in such a miserly way, right, that they're going to eat this much food, and they're going to do this, and then they have to send them to this college, and then putting them in classes is going to cost. And many of those things are not things that you have to do, right? You don't have to pay for piano classes. But they calculate these things, and they're like, oh, you're too expensive, so instead of sending you a piano class, let me just kill you. Right? Great logic. And when you talk about abortion, just because you don't see the child, it doesn't mean a child doesn't exist. I mean, I've seen aborted fetuses from coming out from the OR, because anything that comes out from a human body at some level has to go to pathology level, right? It clears pathology. So they have to do an examination. I still remember this. There was a little baby, and I had to, it was tiny. It wasn't even very well developed. And I had to find, I found his hand, then you have to find his, they literally tore his body apart, right? When they suction it out, You suction it out, and you're like carrying literally like a body, like it has hands and its feet and its face somewhere, and then you're trying. I have to piece it together, and you document. Okay, this was what was there, and somehow, like in this hugely advanced society, somehow this is okay because, well, you know what, you don't ever see it. But I can tell you that even those people who opt to get abortions, they feel super guilty about it. Even if they have no deen, this is a natural inclination. When I was in my first year of college, I wrote the honors college had so they used to run a newspaper or a magazine, and so I said I'm gonna write an article on abortion. And the article had nothing to do with whether abortion is right legally or is not right legally or morally. I didn't make those type of arguments. I just wrote the facts about what happens when you get an abortion. And at least I felt that it was so grotesque that it should be zahir to anyone who has half a heart that you can't do this to another human being. This is not okay. So one of the driving reasons that people do this is out of fear of poverty, because they don't want to, and they do. Sometimes this is enacted actually on entire national scales, right? In India, it was like, no, me and two or something. They had this two-child policy. You see in China that you are not able to have more children, because the way they thought about it is that if you have more children, that they're going to be a burden on society, and then it's going to create poverty. So and now you're in a crisis the other way, right? That you have dwindling populations. Look at Europe, right? And their what's that called? Their child birth rate is so low, and then Muslims who are living in those countries have generally a higher birth rate, and now they start eclipsing and becoming a huge sector of their population, and then they have a problem with that, right? They're like, will you Muslims stop populating? And just the fact that you're having children, that's one of the reasons. People like to think, Muslim fastest growing reason in the world is not necessarily because everyone is converting to Islam, because which one of us are going out there and doing dawah? If we're not going and giving the message, how are they automatically just coming to Islam? It's because we're having more kids, right? At least one thing is still there, alhamdulillah, that we still have some tawakkul on Allah that we're just not killing our kids off. But they're so worried about. It's so much easier. I mean, sometimes when I tell people I have 5 kids, he's like, 5, and it's not 5 because it's a lot of work. They're like, one of my neighbors, I mentioned kids are really, the first thing that came to her mouth, kids are really expensive, right? It's like this, always just worried about money. It's okay. When we had our first child, I didn't even have a job. Right? And subhanAllah, Allah provides. He had more money in the bank than I did. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the provider. And that's when I saw that verse with my own eyes. Don't worry about it. And that's why it's also not permissible to do birth control or family planning on the basis of the fact that if I do that, then we won't have enough risk. So that's something to bear in mind. There is permissibility and allowance for other reasons, but not for this reason, because it's a problem with a person's aqidah. It's a disease of the heart. People's fear of poverty drives them to do crazy things. It causes them to cling to their money. It causes them to cheat. It drives women and people to prostitution. It drives them to commit kufr. Right? That there's some types of poverty that it can even drive a person to disbelief, and we seek refuge from that type of thing. But and it didn't make sense to me. But then sometimes you understand, you realize that people sometimes start off with very shaky faith to begin with, and sometimes it's not even religion that they grow up with. They just grow up with culture, with religion baked in, and then when they're put in a trying situation. And this is one of the most trying situations because at the end of the day, people just want to eat. People are very basic, simpleton type people, and they're so worried that I'm not eating. They're like, they don't even care about religion, right? And they're like, what type of Allah is this? And then they just, it can push a person into kufr. And a lot of this fear of poverty is irrational, and it's actually propagated by shaitan. Shaitan is the one who puts this thought into a person constantly, don't give sadaqah, you're going to become poor. Right? You have way huge reserves. Right? Your $50 are not going to make you poor. Just whispering. Don't spend this money. He just wants you to hoard. الشيطان يعيدكم الفقر ويأمركم بالفحشاء والله يعيدكم مغفرة منه وفضلا. That shaitan is the one who keeps up. He's promising you something, but he's promising you poverty. Meaning that you go and do these actions, you're going to become poor. You're going to become poor, right? And it's this systematic brainwashing that goes on. And he tells you to do indecent things. It's funny, a person like comes and asks you for a donation, and they're like, no man, I can't. $10, I have a lot of things to spend. And then right the next other second, like, bro, you want to go to Starbucks? Like, yeah, let's go, man. Right? And you spend $15. It's so simple, but like, it's a huge disconnect. And on the other side, Wallahu ya'idukum maghfirah. He's telling you, he's promising you poverty, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is promising you forgiveness. And he'll give, when you do the right things, he'll forgive your sins, you'll have your hasanat for that, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will replace it for you. He will give you out of his fadl. ذَلِكَ فَضْلُ اللَّهِ يُؤْتِيهِ مَن يَشَاءُ. But this takes time to inculcate. And one of this particular lesson for students of knowledge, that don't worry too much about money. I've shared the story before, but the first time I went for Hajj, I was 17 years old, and I went with Sheikh Saad. Me and him were Hajj buddies, like tight from that time. You either become tight in madrasa, or you become tight when you're on Hajj. So, you do Hajj together, and it's just like a special bond. So I was already tight with him before. We were madrasa buddies and Hajj buddies, so like really tight now, mashallah. And he was hardcore even from that time, like no shoes, but like he walked from Mina back to he walked from Mina back to the Haram for Tawaf Ziyarah, right, when we were going back. And the whole time, out of humility, no shoes. I was trying to do the no shoes thing too, but when you're walking on that rocky ground in the middle of the desert with like, I was like, I'm putting on my shoes. But I didn't put on the shoes. MashaAllah, he's still like that, MashaAllah. But when we were there, I remember we were in a tent one day, and all of a sudden, like, it's just, it's such a distinct picture. It's a white tent that we're sitting in, and the thing opens, and a whole bunch of young individuals just walk into the tent and sit down. And they were sitting, it's sort of weird. I don't know how they found our tent from all the tents, why they came in. Maybe it was just to teach me a lesson. It's like, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spent the ghurab, the bird, to teach kayfa yuwari sawata akhi. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent these guys to teach me a lesson about life. So they all came down, they were sitting there, and then, I came and I just started talking to them, and there was something different about them. And they were all like Westerners, and at that time I was like beginning my studies, but there was like no one in the West who was studying like Ulum al-Sharia, right? It was just unheard of. And all these guys were actually sitting in Mauritania, or Yemen, or in Tarin somewhere, and they're like students of knowledge. But they spoke perfect English. Some of them might have been converts, and so they were all like Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, like early students, right? When he had first come back, he had inspired them, and they were like, he had ignited this fire of love for knowledge, and they had just gone out. They left their lives, and one of them, I was just recently married, I think. No, I wasn't married yet, but so I was, and one of them actually was married, right? And I was like, whoa, you're married and you're living somewhere, and like, how are you providing for yourself? And what he said was, it really stuck to me. I was like really befuddled, like, you don't have an income. Like, what are you doing? Like, are you traveling? Like, you have to eat every day, you have a family. And he says, Sheikh Hamza told us that one of the first things that a student of knowledge needs to stop worrying about is where he gets his rizq. And then I was like, well, yeah, that's true. Allah will take care of it. It comes back to that, وَمَا مِن دَابَةٍ فِي الْأَرْضِ إِلَّا عَلَى اللَّهِ رِزْقُهَا. when we first started at madrasa, and that was like one of the first madrasas in Chicago, was in the basement of Mullah Salim. And he used to hear a lot of trash talk from the community, like you're ruining these kids' life, and people would be like, what do they tell you? Like, what are you doing to your kids? Well, where are they going to eat from? Alhamdulillah, we ate when we were in madrasa, and we ate when we were out of madrasa, and we ate when we went back to the madrasa, and we ate when we came out of madrasa. Allah's always been feeding us. Right? I ate when I had a job, I ate when I had no job. Right? And Muslim would tell that. I mean, that was one of the things that he was very staunch about. I mean, this to his credit, that he would be like, everyone eats. Right? The wali sahib, whatever, at the end of the day, he eats, and the doctor, he eats. I mean, what are you worried about? And it's actually a strange, this, what do you call that? Sweet irony, or if you want to, poetic irony. There's poetic justice, I guess, in it. There's like many of those people who they said that they thought these kids would never amount to anything in life. All those kids in the basement, like a huge number of them ended up becoming doctors, or like a lawyer, and like super well, they're like well off in their life, this and that. And so what people were fearing, now Chicago is like sort of funny because like one of some of you guys might know Salman and Adnan, right? They're like do a lot of khidmah at Sacred Learning. So Adnan, I mean these kids are like, they look prototypically like Muslim, right? They have this white jubba, they always have long beards, they're wearing topi everywhere they go. One of them stops at a gas station in Skokie, right? And someone comes up to him and he's like, you're a doctor, right? Hey, gas station, right? And he's like, well, actually happened to be right. He is a doctor now. So he's like, yeah. He's like, how do you know that? He's like, yeah, everyone who looks like you, they're a doctor. Everyone who looks like you is a doctor. It's become like almost this trope. It's like a meme, you could make it. It's like the Dr. Sattar look, right? And he's like, you just do that. In fact, it's like to the extent that someone came to me and they wanted to become a student, and like, but I didn't know it was okay if I can become your student if I'm not a doctor, right? So it doesn't work like that. But Allah yarzuqu man yasha. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives risk to whomever He wants. So why does this come? Why do people fear poverty? Sometimes it comes out of a place of greed, because people are not really afraid of poverty, they're just afraid of not being rich. And those are two different things. And sometimes it's not afraid of being rich, they're afraid of not having the opportunity to be rich. They're not even rich yet, but they're like, I could become rich if I go this way. I stand a really long shot if I go that way. SubhanAllah, I mean, you look at, they had this one like YouTuber, and he like just goes to, he drives by magnificent houses across the country, and he just knocks and he's like, hey, what do you do for a living? Sort of an odd thing to do, but it probably garners, I don't know, it must have like 10 million views or something, right? Because those are the type of things that people like. But he'll just go to random houses, and he's like, knock, 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 what do you do? And they have like similar things, like people asking people driving exotic cars in Dubai, like, what do you do for a living? And I don't think a single one of them was a doctor, right? And it's not like, no, not everyone works in Wall Street. Maybe one of them might have been a developer, right? But there are so atypical ways how, and they weren't all, I don't think a single one was an athlete. Maybe one was a musician. But there's so, I mean, when you hear how, the lesson in that, there's so many unthinkable ways how people, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides for people. Like, if you ask me to sit down and brainstorm how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can find risk, like so many of the ways that those people became rich didn't fall even into any of those categories. Like one of them may make plastics or something, or someone might make paper cups. I don't know, like it's something that it wouldn't have been on my list of how you become rich, and it's it's literally la yahtasib. You would not have thought about how it would have come. And many of them, it's the type of things that they don't even really think that they would have made that type of wealth. Like I was just talking to Sheikh about this. I had a student, and I remember him at one point. He was in Morocco, and he was studying over there in Morocco. And I remember him emailing me at one time that we're in a really tight spot. It's hard to get to Madrasa. Can't even afford a car. And he later on, I don't know what happened, but he started a business, or I don't know how he came, but he became into great wealth, right? I mean, not a small amount. But he hadn't finished his course. He's studying with Sheikh Yaqubi, and then he asked Sheikh Yaqubi, what should I do? Sheikh Muhammad Yaqubi of Syria, and what's that called? He asked, should I continue my studies, or might not have this burgeoning business, and he's set, and he said that just leave it. He said you can make money later, you won't get a chance to study. Right? It's just this not fear of poverty, and so alhamdulillah, he did study, mashallah. He finished, and now he's back, inshallah, and will benefit other individuals with his ilm. And it's the same fear of poverty that leads to some individuals selling their religion for the sake of the dunya. اشتروا به ثمنا قليلا. And these people will be defrauded on the day of Qiyamah. And it's sometimes a reason, it becomes a ha'il for the person to come to the deen. Right? And that's why you see that it's a lot of times the people who become religious across different wide swath of society, across different sectors, whether you're Christian, Hindus, or Muslims, a lot of times the people who flock to religion are people who are not very well off. And most of the people who rebel against religion are mutrafin. They're people who are living in luxury, because they have an ulterior motive not to accept religion. Like, why would I accept religion which tells me not to live my profligate lifestyle? Like, they're incentivized not to accept deen. Plus, they feel that because I have money, I have power. Because I have money, they feel justified, and they don't want to part with their money. Right? Is this your religion that does enough? They don't tell you how to spend our money. I mean, I sat with this really insolent kid who had become an atheist, and he's like, what's wrong with he was a Muslim, right, ex-Muslim, and then he's like, what's wrong with your God? Like, why does he care how I pee or how I do X, Y, and Z? Like, and just sort of going on, and it was the same. It's like, it's my money, it's my life, for you to tell me. They have this very takabbur type of attitude, pharaonic attitude when it comes to these type of things. And it holds them back from becoming to the deen. And to a certain degree, this is what held the Quraysh back. It's not that they didn't recognize that he was a prophet of Allah. There is enough signs in their face. The billboard was in their face that he is the prophet of Allah. That was not a joke. But they knew what they had to give up. They had to give up their supremacy in society. They had to give up their ascendancy in society. And they were Quraysh. They held the purse strings of commerce in Arabia. Right? They were at the nexus. Right? They were holding the bell at the Dow Jones. Right? And now that would mean that they have to step out. And now, like, what's that going to happen to us? You have to understand, like, the uber wealthy, wealth breeds wealth. And the uber wealthy in America, right? Like, then you can do stuff like, contract with oligarchs in Russia, and take a mineral contract that's going to be $1 billion. Like, me and you, we don't have access to those type of circles, and we don't have access to those type of deals. We don't have those type of contacts. And it's people who are in that, they protect that turf with their life, right? I mean, it's not easy to come in and get defense contracts where they're willing to pay you $500 for a toilet seat. Yes, I mean, there are some. You can actually look at the rundown of the type of wastage of taxpayer money that's done by government. You'll make your stomach churn, right? But this is military grade toilet seats, right? It's still the same plastic. You just overpay for it. But people guard their turf like anything, and so the Quraysh, it was very threatening to them. And that's one of the reasons also that Islam is so threatening on a global scale for for countries and for governments and for people. It's not necessarily because you have to pray 5 times a day. They could care less, right? It means that providing an economic system that returns equity to the world is far more scarier than your amama, right? It's far more scarier than ISIS. I can guarantee you that, because you can't run and play in futures and create monetary instruments which make no sense and no one understands, but allows you to make so much money that you only have to pay less, and which at the end of the day you created a tax structure that you end up paying less taxes on it than your secretary. I mean, it's a racket. Like, if you're thinking about it, it's a racket, and it's hard to break through, and people are scared about it. So the Quraysh, they clung to it because there was an economic threat. And it's the same desire that leads to something is a sort of related disease what they call mudahana, right? It's like sucking up and being a sycophant. And mudahana has duhun is oil, but it also refers to this idea of women covering up their faces with cosmetics. And what happens is that people they cover up their behavior, their ulterior motives with something that you could say whitewashing, right? They whitewash their intentions. And what happens is you have people sitting with people who are debaucherous and who are profligate and who have low morals, trying to seek some type of worldly gain. And this would happen even with ulama, right? That because they don't necessarily have a strong, source of income, they'll sort of bend their principles, and they make very bad bedfellows, right? The amir and the faqir, meaning the alim and the rich person. And they say, بئس الفقير على باب الأمير ونعم الأمير على باب الفقير. It's not a good situation when you're sitting by at the foot of the Amir. And this is one of the things that governments, sometimes they recognize that, when you donate heavily into something, then you also own the purse strings, right? And when you own the purse strings, you also dictate what gets to be done and what gets not to be done. And sometimes it's not always so calculated. Sometimes it's a little bit more subtle. But when a person donates or gives something to another person, the other person feels indebted, right? And it gives them a sense of control. And that's why some of our ulama were super strict about this. They wouldn't take a hadith because they didn't want that to influence what they say. And this was even from the Western world. This was the idea of why they created tenure, right? The idea that you can get to a certain place in your career, that your ideas were important, that you no longer had to worry about fear of reprisal, of coming up with ideas, even if they were controversial, because you're not going to get fired. Right? That's sort of where the idea of tenure was, to give this intellectual liberty to people. This is the same reason why they institute conflict of interest metrics at hospitals and in academia. And before every talk, you have to declare your conflict of interest. Before every publication, I have to submit my conflict of interest, because they know that if pharma or a biotech or company sort of funded any of my research, then maybe that would bias the truth that you're trying to publish in favor of them. And it's actually very strict, right? The way that they audit that, I mean, it's a very complicated and cumbersome procedure. But they get it too, right? They get it that, when money comes into the picture, that it influences things in a bad way. And so this is a very bad situation. And you see this sometimes. It happens with scholars, that they engage in mudahana, and sometimes it's for money, and sometimes it's to keep their position, to keep their power. When the Grand Mufti of a country can make a statement, like, that, there's no such thing as niqab in Islam, and this is just a cultural thing. I mean, look, if you want to disagree that it's not there on a academic basis, because you think that it's not necessarily wajib or it's not wajib in the West, okay, let's sit down and we can have an academic discussion. But when you make a blanket statement that this is completely cultural, right? Look at Fatawa Misriya. And if you actually go in Fatawa Misriya, on the Darul Ifta, for the National Darul Ifta, and you read that, they're actually quoting from every single madhab how there is no niqab in there, right? And that's literally cherry picking, right? Because if you have half an ounce of your worth in salt in ilm, you know that that is not the predominant opinion of any of the madhabs. In fact, the opinion of all the madhabs is otherwise, and the most lenient, right, that you could say that they ask the women to cover up is because of Saddu Zuriya, is maybe the Ahnaf. But just at least say what it is, right? But just to say that, oh, this is cultural, right, that becomes a problem. Or for example, if you're like Mr. YouTube Mufti, right, and you want a lot of likes, and you want people to be following you, and I saw the first time that came out, you have a bad feeling that something bad is going to come, but a lot of people are influenced, right, and they're like, this guy is so cool and he's so relevant and this and that, and then lo and behold, like 2, 3, 4 years later, then like sort of weird fatwas start coming out, like someone asks you, is there some such thing as hijab and niqab, and you're just advocating against it. Now, this is just a totally cultural thing, right? I don't care if you're Hanafi or Maliki or what else, but you can't with a straight face tell me that it's completely cultural, right? It's not that some guy sat around and things like, oh, let's make a culture of putting niqab on women, and let's then stick in special things about that in our religion. I mean, how do you explain away the Ummahatul Mu'mineen? Are you going to tell me that they didn't wear it? I mean, you can't rewrite history. Or the fact that, you have a 1 hour, a 1.5 hour talk about, 1.5 hour talk about interest. Interest is very simple. It's not okay. You don't, when I see a 1.5 hour talk on interest, then just know ahead of time there's going to be a lot of song and dance. So I don't listen to a 1.5 talk. There's a lot of hand waving. I just cut to the end, and this whole argument that, oh yeah, interest can be okay as long as it's not like predatory interest or something like that. There's ijma on this issue. There's ijma. Yeah, فَأَذَنُوا بِحَرْبٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. This sarah is a sarih nas, and I can understand if you're coming at it from a super academic perspective, and I'm not doubting anyone's intention. I'm not saying a person has this disease or that. Allah knows what is in a person's heart. But you have to be careful, right? You have to be careful. Like people who are in situations where they're public speaking at ISNA or for Mina, and you want to get re-invited. If you're tailoring your talks in such a way that you want to keep your fame, that's mudahana, right? That's mudahana. Right? The job of the alim is to preserve their viratha and just present it as it is. People like it, whoever likes it, let them take it. And whoever doesn't like it, let them reject it. And their hisab is on Allah. That's not our job. Our job is just to be like a Rasul. We just deliver the message. So what is the treatment for this? The first treatment for fear of poverty is that a person should inculcate an attitude of contentment. Because if you're content, no matter how little you have, you'll always be rich. Contentment is the treasure that will never be exhausted. The second thing is to remember that rizq is muqaddar and is already set. Whatever is going to come your way will never miss you. And whatever will miss you, you'll never get it. The only decision that you need to make is fajmil fi talab, be beautiful in the way that you seek your rizq. It's ajib, this one brother just in this i'tikaf was coming and talking to me, such a sad story about, I think, one of his relatives, that she had written all her wealth already for her, it was her daughter or her niece, one of her close, let's say her daughter, right? She had already written all of her wealth for her daughter. She was already 70 something at like an old age. She wasn't going to live that much longer, and she wanted to keep something from her, but she didn't give it to her right away. She invested in a 1-story house. She made it 2-story. There was a rental income that was coming in, and she just wanted to settle it down and make it stable and just hand it over. It was already musallam. It was done. And then this daughter, out of their greed, right? They put court case. They called the police. They did all this conniving on their own mother, right? Just to get. And this is not an isolated story. I know another story that recently that came to me for their family member. there was an old lady, Ajib, right? And it's, usurping the wealth of an old person, right? That they just go and stay there. They had the rental income, they took she didn't have a place to live, right? So she was the mother-in-law. So he bullied her out of her money, took all her money. But Ajib, that person had a terrible end. He got cancer and he died real fast. And I remember the case came to me because I was wondering, we were saying, how do we get her right? Now other people had to support her because she didn't have access to her own money. And she's so scared about saying anything to the son-in-law because now he can abuse the daughter, he can ruin her life, he can abuse her and throw her on the street and she'll have nothing. So she just had to keep quiet. When you're that old, you have no, quote-unquote, Sahara. So we were putting together a fund, and by the time, maybe the money reached her, but in short term, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took that individual. But in this situation, with this daughter who did this to the mother, Ajib, that same thing was coming to you anyway. That risk was coming to you, and you knew that it was coming to you. Why do you have to take it by haram? Right? Why do you have to take it by batil? People do funny things. The third treatment is don't fear poverty. Just remember in our deen, being poor is actually the ideal. Being poor is the ideal. We're living a non-idealic life, right? Living it up and having all of these things. If Allah forces us to the default setting about where we should be, if He forces us into sunnah of our Nabi, these are the people who are going to enter 500 years before the rich. Why wouldn't you want to be on the thing? We should actually throw a party if you become poor. Right? Alhamdulillah, it's going to Jannah early party. We don't think about it like that. And the fourth thing to remember is that our greatness, richness, is the richness of Islam. Alhamdulillah bi ni'matil Islam, wa kafa biha ni'ma. If Allah is happy with us, then we don't worry about what else is going on in life. We'll do one more disease. This one is the disease of hard-heartedness. Hard-heartedness. أَفَمَنْ شَرَحَ اللَّهُ. This isn't particularly listed, but it's worthy of mention. I think it warrants a place in the list of spiritual diseases. So, أَفَمَنْ شَرَحَ اللَّهُ صَدْرَهُ لِلْإِسْلَامِ فَهُوَ عَلَى نُورٍ مِّن رَبِّهِ. There's a lot of imagery that exists in terms of light in the chest, right, and light in the heart. And there are actually metaphysical realities that actually bear out those imageries that are alluded to. Some people can experience those, some people don't experience those, but it doesn't take away from the fact that those things exist. For example, people say that the tajalliyat, فَلَمَّا تَجَلَّى رَبُّهُ لِلْجَبْلِ جَعَلَهُ دَكًّا وَخَرَّ مُوسَى صَعِقًا. This tajalli. So the tajalliyat are descending on the haram. So sometimes people, enter into the haram and they just feel different, right? They say, I can't describe it in words. What are you feeling? Something is going on in the ghaibi realm that you're feeling tangible in the zahiri realm, right? It's a reflection of that. So there's something going on under the hood, right? Same thing, sometimes you come and sit in someone's presence and you just feel different, right? You feel like, there's metaphysical things that are going on. There's tawajjuhat and all these type of things, but people don't, and even if the person is not actively giving tawajjuh, it happens on a ghayr ikhtiyari sense. There's benefits which are to be had, which is one of the reasons that you should sit with the righteous. It's actually a good thing. لا يأكل طعامك إلا تقي. You should sit with the muttaqi individuals, because just by sitting, not even saying anything, there's benefit in that. Right? You're eating food. لا يأكل طعامك. You're eating food. You're not having a dars. You're not having a halaqah, but there's benefit in that. So there's, when you go to the haram, but there are some people, like they say that, one of the righteous women in the past, someone, she mentioned to one of the mashayikh, she said, your heart, or she mentioned another, she said that your heart is of stone, that's why you do tawaf of stone, right? My heart is connected with Allah and I'm doing tawaf of the tajalliyat. And in recent times, I know of at least one individual that when they go to the haram, it becomes manifest, those lights. And it's like they're walking through light. It's probably hard to explain for me and you to understand, but for him, that's his thought, right? He's walking through light. And there is real nur there. I mean, you can also sort of see the nur. And you go to the Kaaba and you see it, there's something there. You see nur on people's faces. But I guess whatever this person experiences is like, on a different level. So anyway, صَدْرَهُ فَهُوَ عَلَى نُورٍ مِّن He is on a light from his Lord. But then right after that, the opposite. فَوَيْلٌ لِلْقَاسِيَةِ قُلُوبُهُمْ مِنْ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. Okay, what? So woe be to the heart that is hard. It is so hard that it doesn't even make the dhikr of Allah. It doesn't even remember Allah. The heart that remembers Allah is like a heart that is alive. And the heart that doesn't remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is like the heart that is dead. And I can tell you, very early when I got into this field of this game, very, very early days, my teacher had given me one of the first lessons, and that was probably one of the first times in my life where I actually did zikr, this thing called zikr. And it changed my life, right? It changed my life. I mean, I didn't know, it's like, you don't know what you're missing, right? You literally didn't know. I was like, oh my God, this was the real deal. This is what I was looking for. And I remember that summer I was teaching a summer Arabic intensive, and I was teaching Zad al-Talibin. And I was by no means a scholar. I'm not no means a scholar, but I was just like a kid who had studied Arabic, and they needed a teacher, so I was teaching Arabic, and I was doing Zad al-Talibin. And then the hadith comes, right? The one who remembers Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is like and the one who doesn't is like the living and the dead. So I did the hadith, but I remember telling my class this, you could not describe what I'm feeling in my life right now better than this. Because it's like before I was dead, and now I just feel alive, like my heart came alive. And so this hardness that comes on the heart, it makes the heart callous. And it makes the heart unfeeling, and it makes the heart cold, right? People call it, cold-blooded murder, right? They say a person is cold-hearted. And you have to think about what could drive a person to kill another person, right? You have to have ice in your face. It's not, and a lot of times, in pathology, that's the other thing, so when you do forensics, you see the worst of human society. So you get those people who are dead on the table, and homicides and all of these type of things, and all that CSI type stuff. That's not what I do for a living. I think my cousins think that's what I do. I'm just some type of detective or something like that, and deal with dead people, but I don't do autopsies. But you do go through training about that, and there's a whole science about the bullet, where it can enter from, and angles, and the type of spread that occurs on the skin. You can calculate ballistics and how far away they were when they shot the person. It's sort of interesting if you're into that macabre type of thing, but it's really macabre. A lot of times when people actually kill other people, it's because they're under the influence. Because there's an inherent, in the fitrah of an individual, there's this barrier that no matter how hard you get, maybe you might beat the other person, you might punch them a lot, but once a person falls dead, the person's just not going to keep on doing to kill them. They just sort of walk away, right? Whether it's a spousal abuse, whether it's a person that you got into a fight with at the bar, it doesn't matter. Human beings don't do that to each other. It requires something to get over that thing. And one of the things that type of people that don't need to overcome that is are psychopaths, right? So I don't know, in my very wide readings, one of the things I've also read about it is psychology of psychopaths. I don't know why. But people sometimes are drawn to the occult, right? So that's my being drawn to the occult. I want to know why do psychopaths function? What's the psychology of a serial killer? What's going through their brain? And one of the characteristics that you find about them, right, without going into the whole psychology aspect about that, is they have this sifa. They have a very hard heart, right? They don't really feel. They don't empathize. So they can actually kill something and not really feel remorse afterwards. In fact, sometimes they feel the opposite. That's even more perverseness, right? But for a lot of them, it's just cold-blooded killing. And the other thing, they lack this fineness of feeling. And a lot of times you see these people who are hard-hearted. They're very harsh. They're very rough. They're very they're very filthy in their tongue. Very, very inflammatory. And the Arab, the Bedouins are sometimes the prototype of this. Some of them were very hard-hearted. Because like, how could you be with the Nabi and still harbor nifaq? Right? It didn't make sense. Like, how could you be in and you're seeing the truth, you're seeing the miracles, and your heart doesn't move? Like, you saw this sometimes with the Bani Israel, who were with Musa alayhi salam. Like, you go, and it used to boggle me for so long, like, probably to this moment. Like, when they're with Musa alayhi salam, Man, Salwa, saving you from Fir'aun, this resurrection, he's coming back with the commandments, he's on Mount Sinai, you want to hear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like, he opens up Jerusalem for you. I mean, it's like sign after sign after sign, and then you go and worship a cow. Like, how, like, from a psychological perspective, like, my undergrad is in psychology, I'm trying to understand that psychology is stupid. Like, how can, it didn't make sense. Like, how do you do that? And one of the reasons that people went to that is because of this, actually. Right? It's because their hearts were hard. And so they were able to betray Musa alayhi salam, much less Musa betray Allah. They were able to betray Allah, right? Because of the hardness in their hearts. It was a spiritual disease that allows them to do things with impunity. And it actually took them to the point where they used to kill the Anbiya. يَقْتُلُونَ النَّبِيِّينَ بِغَيْرِ حَقٍّ. They used, without any right. They used to actually kill them. They say something that you don't like, just kill them. Right? Nabi of Allah. And so from a Muslim, there's the story of Aqra ibn Habis. He was, when he was visited by the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ kissed one of his children. And he went to say that. He said, I have 10 children, I never kissed any one of them. Imagine never kissing your children. And if you think that's weird, sad, like, I remember, like, there's one individual who was talking to me, like, some parents are just not very emotive. And they said, like, the one time that one of my parents gave me a hug, I just started crying. Right, when they were a kid. Because they didn't know what that felt like. Right? They're always just shouting at them and getting angry. It's not like they were bad parents. They're providing for them and taking care of them, but maybe it's tough love, maybe it's something, but it's also maybe a little bit of hardness of the heart. Right? I mean, our kids, you should just drown them in love. Right? You should drown them in love. If they don't get love from you, they'll look for love somewhere else. Right? It's like the Hafiz who became Murtad, and I think Sheikh Hussaini went to go, and his father took him to go and visit him and to talk to him. And he said that, I never had love, but Jesus loves me. Right? Love is a powerful factor. It can change, it can take a person who memorize the entire Quran out of the deen, ajib, right? Because he's just looking for love. And the Prophet ﷺ, he told him, he said, can I help it if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has removed mercy from your heart? And who doesn't have mercy on others, they won't be shown mercy. And Malik ibn Dinar, he said, مَا ضُرِبَ عَبْدٌ بِعُقُوبَةٍ عَظَمَ مِنْ قَسْوَةِ الْقَلْبِ. That a person is not afflicted with a punishment because it's a punishment to have a hard heart. That is worse than hardness of the heart. وَمَا غَضِبَ اللَّهُ عَلَىٰ قَوْمٍ إِلَّا نَزَعَ الرَّحْمَةَ مِنْ قُلُوبِهِمْ. And if you want to know if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not pleased with the nation, just look to see if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has removed rahmah from their hearts. Right? And there are certain societies that you actually see. There's no better word that I can use to describe their culture other than like some Scandinavian type, like the sterile, right? Very sterile relationships. Right? That there's no rahmah there. So it's weird. Sometimes they'll have rahmah about like trees or something, right? Like tree huggers, but there's no rahmah for other human beings. Like there's no the idea that there's a person next to you and he's hungry and like, yeah, let me just feed him, right? It's me, mine, my own. It's just each one living in their shiloh. They say that if you want to diagnose this disease, one of the ways that you can diagnose this is to look at the eye of the individual. Right? Is the eye wet or is the eye dry? Right? The person who has hardness of the heart, it's very hard for them to cry. The person whose heart is soft, they cry at everything. Right? And it doesn't matter if you're a guy or a girl. This is like a Western conditioning of machismo that guys shouldn't cry because that's like you're supposed to be strong. The fact that you cry is not a sign of weakness. It's actually a sign of spiritual strength. فَلْيَضْحَكُوا قَلِيلًا وَلْيَبْكُوا كَثِيرًا. You should cry a lot. The Prophet ﷺ, when they're asked, when Aisha radiallahu anha was asked about the most amazing thing about the Prophet ﷺ, right? I mean, his whole matter of Kama, she's like, everything is amazing about him. Everything was wondrous about him. But she went on to describe how he used to just pray at night and just cry and cry and cry. I mean, there was no one who was more masculine than the Prophet ﷺ, right? He was the one who would take on an army single-handedly, like move over Rambo. Ana nabiyyun la kadhib, ana ibn Abdul Muttalib, right? I mean, he was the ultimate when it came to that side. When he stood before his Lord, he just cried like a baby. It's actually because his heart was alive. And this day and age, I mean, I think only was when I met people who were like developing themselves spiritually, it was like the first time that I heard grown men cry, right? It was weird for me, right? And then they cried like babies. It's actually one of the first times I saw that was actually the first time that I was moved to tears was actually in one talk, the first time when I went to Suffern, New York. Suffern, New York, and there was a scholar who came there, and he gave a talk about the sacrifices of the ulama. And even though as a student of knowledge, I had no idea of what our history was, and how much blood there was behind that, and how much sacrifice there was behind that. And I was just like, I was blown away. And I think that's the first time probably in my life, and it was probably by that time in my 20s. Man, it's the first time that you shed a tear. Like, that's a long time. And I was like, and then after that, I think my own teacher, Sheikh Hussaini, that's when he was given responsibility to become, a sheikh himself and do this work. And he was like, I'm not ready for this. And it was like sincerity overload, right? Like all my wires were just, and then I was just crying. I'm like, what is this? What is going on? But then afterward, you felt alive, right? Because that rock that was sitting in your heart, in your chest for so long, finally broke. And that was the first of many other moments, many other etiqafs, and sitting in basements in ICC and hearing people talk to Allah, and then it just touching your heart, and slowly your heart starts to open up. So the heart, and my sister-in-law, she would say that there used to be this one girl in the madrasa. There was never a time that she would pray except that you would see tears in her eyes. Right? People's hearts were alive. We can't cry. That's one, and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu was like this, right? And this is the udhr that Aisha radiallahu anhu made to the Prophet ﷺ not to make him imam, right? He's like, he's so raqiqul qalb, he's just going to be crying all the time. You can't even understand his qur'an, don't make him the imam, right? And she had an ulterior motive, right? She had another good motive why she, and it was out of love for her father, why she said that, but that's what she cited. And he was like that, right? He was very soft. So that's one thing. Another sign of a hard heart is that it's very hard for them to forgive, right? So something happened between two people, then you go back. It's hard for people to say sorry, okay? So someone actually comes and says sorry, and you're like, right? They look the other way, and then you come back and, dude, I'm really sorry. I don't want to mess up my outfit, and then they look the other way. Some parents are like this. If your kids come and say sorry, accept their sorry immediately, because you're teaching them the habit of owning up to their things, taking ownership, and the fact that if you say sorry, that all is forgiven. That's not a high barrier of entry, right? Some parents, they don't want to act tough, right, with their kids. And what's going to happen if you do that, you act tough with your kids, they're just going to stop saying sorry, right? And then you lose even more control. People who do that, they're trying to play mind games. They're trying to play the thing that if I act tough and I'm going to exert my control over the child. You're not going to be able to control your child. They're just going to say, forget about you, right? And that's not, no one moves from that. Another thing, a sign of this is that these people are slow to cool down from their anger, right? When they heat up, they're slow to dissipate. And there's a whole hadith about different combinations about how fast you heat up and how fast you cool down. And so the worst situations, the first situation is you heat up really fast and you slow down really cool. You cool down very slow. And then the fourth sign of these people with a hard heart is that they can't take advice. Right? They just like, you give them advice, and they're just not willing to take it. You tell them something, like one of the other brothers was mentioning this to me, and I forgot, and it just hurt so much. Like he was pouring his heart into some of the youth and here in Tampa, and trying to bring them to Deen, this, that, and the other. And he says, okay guys, I did what you wanted, right? Like, we hung out, let's just pray namaz. And they're like, no, we're not going to do that, right? It's just hard. They're looking at your face, and they'll see you pray, and they'll just sit there and watch, right? They'll just sit there and watch, and their heart won't move. You show them what's going on to the children of Syria, and nothing will budge in their pockets. Like nothing, you can't touch people. Like they're just hard. So what are the causes for this to become a hard heart? It starts with sin. This is one of the big ways. When a person sins, there's a nuqatul sawda, there's a black dot that comes. You keep on sinning, it starts to engulf the heart, and then there's ghayn, and then there's ghaim, and then there's ran, and then there's rusting, like you leave metal for a while and it rusts, and the heart, and you don't polish it, then it gets rusted, and then after it gets rusted, then there's khatam, and it gets sealed, and then there's taba, Allahu ala qulubihim, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts a seal, and then there's a certain level that comes, that alladhi yahulu bayna al-mar'i wa qalbihi. Such if a person persists long enough, then Allah Himself stands between the person's heart. You don't have a choice to change. Even if you want to change, you can't change right now, because Allah is there. And the only way to get out of that is to beg Allah, that, Ya Allah, let me get back, right? Allahumma a'udhu min dhalik. The other thing that causes hardness of heart is laughing too much. Laughter kills the heart. And there's actually a riwayah to this effect in Adab al-Mufrad. The other thing is excessive talking without the remembrance of Allah. Right? And this is something that in our gatherings we have to get used to interjecting the dhikr of Allah, or to speak of something about the akhirah or some good topic into our normal conversations. Even if we're hanging out, even if we're meeting lightly, if you just immersion and talk of the dunya, we should be talking about dunya in the masjid, but even if outside the masjid we're talking always about dunya, then that's what's just going to be in our heart. And it can sometimes be simple, right? Just saying something that we're grateful for, that Allah gives in our life. There's simple ways to introduce the concept of Allah or the concept of Deen into our gatherings, into our discussions. So in the hearts that are hard, those who are farthest from Allah are those hearts who are hard. And you have to understand that there's إن من الحجارة لما يتفجر منه الأنهار وإن منها لما يشقق فيخرج منه الماء. There's heart, like some people's hearts are so hard, they're like rocks. كالحجارة أو أشد قسوة, they're even harder than that, because even from the rocks there's some ones that's water springs forth. Even the rocks cry, but we cannot. And there's the rocks. What is the biggest rock that you can think of? It's a mountain. This Quran, if it descended on a mountain, it would rent it asunder. It would become reza, it would become like just destroyed. But the Quran comes, we hear it every night, but it doesn't destroy our hearts. We still can't cry. So then you already know. We don't have to ask the Shaykh, where's my heart? We should already know, right? We should already know. And in Hilyatul Awliya, right, Malik ibn Dinar, you already mentioned that, right? There's no punishment that is severe than having a hard heart. So how do you treat this? You treat this with the dhikr of Allah, right? That enlightens the heart. And afzalu dhikri al-Quran is to read the Quran, to contemplate on the Quran, to make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revives the heart. Right? The third thing is to, and I had this discussion with, so when the heart is hard, when a person's dying, what do? They put the paddles on, right? And they give them shocks. So what happens is that there's the thing that opens the heart is nur, right? That's the thing that breaks down. So the Quran coming down on the mountain is just like the tajalli of Allah, that nur, when it descended upon that mountain, it broke it down. The nur of the Quran, when it comes, it breaks down the rock of the mountain. And when the nur of different things come on the heart, that's what starts to wear the heart down. And there's different places where you can get nur, right? Sometimes it's sitting in the suhbah of the mashayikh and the awliya, that starts to open it up. Sometimes وَذَكِّرْ فَإِنَّ الذِّكْرَ تَنْفَعُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, sometimes that can open it up. But I was having this discussion with Mufti Kamaluddin several years back, right? We were talking about different ways, and he says sometimes you need like to take on the Uzi, right? Like you need to take out the AK-47, the big guns, and that's like going to the haram. Right? You go to the haram, and then Allah works His magic, because that's like the big reboot, right? And so you sometimes Umrah will do it for you, and for sometimes that won't even do it for the person. And sometimes you have to put the $10,000, and you make the Hajj, right? And that's like the hard reset. Like for the computer, you do the hard reset. Go and make a Hajj, and then that can open up the heart. So we'll stop right here.